May 9, 1945, 0830 hours, off Sakishima Islands, Pacific Ocean. Japanese kamikaze aircraft dove through anti-aircraft fire toward British carrier HMS Victorious. 5-inch guns fired, 40mm Bofors hammered, 20mm Oerlikon cannon tracers streaked skyward. Mitsubishi Zero fighter, engine screaming, pilot committed to death, slammed into flight deck forward. Explosion, fireball, deck crew thrown by blast. American liaison officers watching from flag bridge expected catastrophe. Wooden flight deck carriers burned for hours after kamikaze strikes. USS Bunker Hill knocked out of war 2 days earlier by similar attack. 393 dead. Victorious deck crew recovered, stood, assessed damage. Flight deck dented, paint scorched, armored steel beneath undamaged. Firefighters extinguished burning wreckage. Damage control teams inspected structure. Deck crews cleared debris. 1100 hours, 2.5 hours after impact, Victorious resumed flight operations. Aircraft launching, recovering, strike missions continuing. American observers radioed disbelief. British carrier absorbed kamikaze strike, kept fighting, minimal downtime. This was not unique incident. British Pacific Fleet carriers absorbed kamikaze hits between April and August 1945. Every carrier struck remained operational. None knocked out of war. None suffered casualties approaching American wooden deck carrier losses. The armored flight deck, design feature American naval architects called wasteful and inefficient, proved exactly what British designers intended: survivable protection enabling sustained operations under suicide attack. Critics who claimed armor sacrificed too much strike capability for theoretical protection saw otherwise. Kamikaze era validated armored carrier philosophy completely. British carriers kept fighting when American carriers burned. The challenge began with geography and alliance politics combined. By 1945, Royal Navy focused primarily European waters, Mediterranean, Atlantic, Indian Ocean. Pacific War remained predominantly American effort. US Navy providing overwhelming carrier strength, battleship support, amphibious capability. Churchill and British government recognized political necessity, contributing to Pacific victory. Post-war influence in Asia required British military presence during final campaigns. Admiralty assembled British Pacific Fleet, designated Task Force 57 under American operational control, to operate alongside US 3rd and 5th Fleets against Japan. American Navy leadership greeted British participation with skepticism bordering hostility. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, opposed British Pacific involvement, questioned Royal Navy ability, operate at Pacific distances, doubted British equipment compatibility with American logistics. Pacific distances exceeded anything Royal Navy experienced European waters, 3,000 miles from advanced bases in Australia to operational areas off Japan. US Navy perfected underway replenishment, enabling task forces operate weeks without returning port. British had minimal experience with these techniques. American carriers operated 90 to 100 aircraft. British carriers 50 to 60, 1/3 fewer strike capability. Equipment incompatibilities seemed insurmountable. British used different aviation fuel, different ammunition calibers, different radio frequencies. British determination overcame American reluctance. November 1944, British Pacific Fleet formally established, Admiral Bruce Fraser commanding. Composition built around fleet carriers: HMS Illustrious, HMS Victorious, HMS Indomitable, HMS Indefatigable, and HMS Formidable. Battleships King George V and Howe provided surface firepower. 5 cruisers, 15 destroyers, numerous smaller vessels, most critically, fleet train of 75 support ships, tankers and ammunition ships, and repair vessels and hospital ships, enabling sustained operations without American logistics dependence. Carrier specifications reflected pre-war British design philosophy, prioritizing protection over numbers. Illustrious class and related designs: 23,000 tons standard displacement, 748 feet length, 95-foot beam. Armament: 16 4.5-inch dual-purpose guns, 48 2-pounder pom-poms, numerous Bofors and Oerlikon. Most significantly, 3-inch armored flight deck, 4.5-inch armored hangar sides, 2.5-inch armored hangar deck, enclosed armored hangar box protecting aircraft and aviation fuel. Design traded aircraft capacity for survivability. Hangar volume limited by armored enclosure, carried 50 to 60 aircraft versus 90 plus on American Essex-class carriers. Fire suppression systems emphasized, compartmentalization extensive, damage control prioritized. American Essex-class comparison illustrated different philosophy. 27,000 tons, similar size to British carriers, but wooden flight deck over light armor, open hangar design maximizing volume, carried 90 to 100 aircraft. Greater strike capability, more sorties per day, overwhelming offensive power, but vulnerable to damage, fire could spread hangar to hangar. Wooden deck offered no protection against bombs or kamikaze strikes. Design philosophy emphasized defense, accepted vulnerability as trade-off for maximum aircraft numbers. British Pacific Fleet deployed forward March 1945, established advanced base at Sydney, Australia, moved operational area toward Japanese home islands. First combat operations March 26th against Sakishima Islands, island group between Formosa and Okinawa. Mission: suppress Japanese airfields, threatening American invasion of Okinawa. British carriers launched strikes repeatedly, bombing runways, destroying aircraft on ground, engaging air opposition. Operations demonstrated capability, sorties flown successfully, targets struck, minimal losses. American observers noted British professionalism, strike coordination effective, navigation excellent. Skepticism began eroding. April and May 1945 brought kamikaze campaign intensity. Japanese organized mass suicide attacks against Allied fleets. Conventional attacks proved ineffective against American anti-aircraft firepower. Kamikaze offered guarantee of hitting target if pilot reached ship. American carriers suffered terribly. USS Franklin struck March 19th by bomb-penetrating wooden flight deck, detonating in hangar among fueled and armed aircraft. Explosions and fires killed 724 crew, ship nearly sunk, saved by heroic damage control, but knocked out of war. USS Bunker Hill hit May 11th by 2 kamikazes, fires consumed ship, 393 killed, carrier withdrawn from combat. Pattern repeated across fast carrier task force. Wooden deck carriers proved catastrophically vulnerable to suicide attacks. British carriers faced same threat. April 1st, HMS Indefatigable, operating off Sakishima, launching strikes against airfields. 07:28 hours, kamikaze penetrated combat air patrol, dove on Indefatigable. Aircraft struck flight deck at junction with island, exploded on impact. Armored deck held, explosion blew hole in island structure, killed 14 crew, wounded 27. Damage control teams responded immediately, fires extinguished within minutes, structural damage assessed, flight deck remained operational. Temporary repairs completed, full operations resumed 45 minutes after impact. Same day, HMS Victorious, struck by kamikaze, glancing blow, aircraft clipped deck, spun into sea, minimal damage, operations continued uninterrupted. April 6th, HMS Illustrious, struck by kamikaze, attempting attack on forward lift. Anti-aircraft fire shattered aircraft before impact, wingtip clipped island, bulk of wreckage plunged into sea 50 feet from ship where bomb detonated. Underwater explosion damaged hull plating below waterline, vibration problems worsened. Speed limited to 19 knots. Illustrious withdrawn from operations, sent home for extensive refit. This demonstrated armor limitations. Near miss still caused significant damage, requiring months repair. May 4th, concentrated kamikaze attacks. HMS Formidable struck 15:30 hours. Kamikaze hit flight deck center section, carrying 250 kilogram bomb. Larger explosion, fires threatened hangar, sprinkler system activated, foam smothered flames, armored hangar contained damage. Explosion created 2-foot square hole in armored deck, 24 by 20 foot depression, splinter penetrated boiler room. Speed reduced temporarily to 18 knots. Damage control teams worked continuously. 1700 hours, 5.5 hours after strike, Formidable resumed flight operations. Same day, HMS Indomitable struck by kamikaze. Aircraft hit flight deck aft of island. Armored deck prevented penetration, fires contained, operations continued with minimal interruption. May 9th, second wave of concentrated attacks. HMS Victorious struck twice same day. First kamikaze, 0830 hours, hit flight deck forward near B2 gun mount, created 25 square foot hole, depressed deck over 144 square feet, disabled forward gun mounts, killed 4 crew, wounded 24. Second kamikaze struck glancing blow aft, destroyed 4 corsairs, damaged arresting gear, wounded additional crew. Despite 2 hits within hours, Victorious able to launch aircraft 1 hour after attacks, land aircraft 12 hours later, fully operational after 2 days. Same day, HMS Formidable struck second time by kamikaze, second hit on same carrier within 5 days. Explosion massive, appeared devastating to observers. Armor held again, fires contained, operations resumed after damage control completed temporary repairs. If you are finding this analysis of armored carrier survivability interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Pattern proved consistent across all kamikaze encounters. British carriers struck, armor held, fires contained, temporary repairs completed, operations resumed hours later. American liaison officers reported phenomenon with amazement. US Navy carriers struck by similar attacks burned for days. Required return to Pearl Harbor or stateside for repairs. Lost from combat for months. British carriers absorbed equivalent hits, continued fighting. Technical analysis explained survivability difference. 3-inch armored flight deck prevented bomb or aircraft penetration into hangar. Kamikaze struck deck, exploded on surface, blast directed outward and upward, minimal penetration, downward. Wooden deck carriers, kamikaze penetrated deck, exploded in hangar among parked aircraft, fueled and armed aircraft detonated sympathetically. Fires spread uncontrolled through open hangar spaces. British enclosed armored hangar compartmentalized damage, fires contained within struck section, sprinkler systems and foam suppression prevented spread, undamaged hangar sections continued operations. Crew casualties reflected armor effectiveness. Kamikaze hits on British carriers during Sakishima operations. Total casualties approximately 50 killed, 150 wounded across all incidents. Franklin alone, single bomb penetration, killed 724. Bunker Hill, 2 kamikaze hits, 393 killed. Armoured protection saved British lives as effectively as it saved ships. Honest assessment requires acknowledging British carrier limitations. Smaller air groups meant fewer sorties per day. Victorious operated 60 aircraft. Essex operated 90. Daily sortie rate. Victorious, 80 to 100 sorties. Essex, 150 to 200 sorties. British contribution to overall strike capability remained smaller than American despite equal carrier numbers. 4 British carriers deployed simultaneously delivered roughly equivalent sorties to 2 American Essex class. Offensive capability clearly inferior, but mission-assigned British Pacific Fleet suited capabilities. Sakishima airfield suppression, repetitive strikes against same targets, required sustained presence more than overwhelming single-day sortie numbers. British carriers struck airfields daily, prevented Japanese rebuilding, maintained suppression throughout Okinawa campaign. Total British sorties against Sakishima, 5,000 aircraft missions, March through June 1945. Japanese airfields rendered inoperable. Air attacks on Okinawa invasion reduced significantly. Mission accomplished despite smaller air groups. Logistics achievement proved equally significant as combat operations. Fleet train enabled sustained operations 3,000 miles from Australian bases without American logistics support. Underway replenishment techniques perfected. Tankers transferred fuel while steaming. Ammunition ships transferred ordnance. Repair ships conducted maintenance at sea. British Pacific Fleet operated 62 consecutive days without returning port, record for Royal Navy, proving capability, sustained Pacific tempo operations. US Navy studied British techniques, incorporated improvements into post-war doctrine. July 1945, British Pacific Fleet redesignated Task Force 37, integrated fully into US Third Fleet under Admiral William Halsey. Operations shifted from Sakishima to Japanese home islands, direct strikes. British carriers struck targets Hokkaido and northern Honshu, attacked shipping and airfields and industrial facilities. Coordination with American carriers improved continuously. Radio compatibility problems solved. Refueling procedures standardized. Target assignment integrated. By war end August, British Pacific Fleet functioned as seamless component of Allied Pacific naval forces. Comparative analysis proves British armoured carrier design philosophy vindicated by kamikaze experience. Design question fundamentally: maximize aircraft numbers, accepting vulnerability, or reduce aircraft numbers, gaining protection. American choice: maximize offense. British choice: balance offense with defense. Conventional warfare environment: American choice superior. More aircraft meant more strikes, more targets destroyed. Kamikaze environment: British choice superior. Armor-enabled survival, sustained operations, continued presence. Strategic calculus favored sustained presence over maximum single-day capability. British carriers delivered lower sortie rates but remained operational throughout campaign. American carriers delivered higher sortie rates when operational but required extended repair periods after damage. Net contribution over extended operations approached equality. 4 British carriers operational continuously versus 6 American carriers with 2 rotating to rear areas for repair produced comparable sustained strike capability. Cost-effectiveness analysis shows British approach financially sound for Royal Navy strategic position. British could not afford building carrier numbers matching American production. 40 Essex class built versus 5 British fleet carriers deployed Pacific. British maximised value of limited carrier numbers through survivability. Each British carrier contributed longer operational presence than equivalent American carrier, compensated partially for numerical inferiority. Armour added 30% construction cost per carrier, but eliminated reconstruction costs. After kamikaze damage, repair bills for Franklin exceeded original construction cost. Anglo-American naval cooperation improved dramatically through shared combat. Initial American skepticism about British contribution transformed into respect through demonstrated competence and survivability. Admiral Halsey initially opposed British participation, commended British Pacific Fleet performance, specifically noting armoured carrier advantages after witnessing kamikaze survival. Post-war, US Navy carrier designs incorporated armoured flight decks. Midway-class carriers featured 3.5-inch armour. Direct influence from British Pacific Fleet experience. Post-war analysis by multiple navies acknowledged armoured carrier value. US Naval Technical Mission reviewed British carrier damage reports, recommended armoured flight decks for future construction. Soviet Navy studied British designs, incorporated armoured carriers into post-war building programs. French Navy rebuilt carriers with armoured flight decks based on British pattern. Jet aircraft era increased landing speeds and weights, strengthened decks required. British 3-inch armour became standard rather than specialty. Strategic impact extended beyond immediate combat contribution. British presence in Pacific final operations ensured British role post-war Asian settlements, participation in Japanese surrender ceremonies, influence over post-war arrangements. Fleet deployed demonstrated British continued great power status despite exhaustion from European war. Investment in Pacific operations, expensive and difficult, bought political influence worth strategic cost. Human cost remained modest given operation scale. British Pacific Fleet casualties, all causes March to August 1945. Approximately 200 killed, 500 wounded. Remarkably low considering kamikaze attacks absorbed. 5 months continuous operations, thousands of sorties flown. Armour protected sailors as effectively as ships. Compartmentalization and damage control prevented escalation. Protective design philosophy saved lives. The verdict acknowledges British Pacific Fleet succeeded in mission assigned despite limitations. Smaller air groups meant fewer sorties. Logistical challenges created difficulties. Equipment incompatibilities caused friction. But sustained operations achieved. Targets struck successfully. Kamikaze attacks survived without operational elimination. American respect earned. Political objectives met. Armoured carriers proved worth exactly as designers intended. Survivability under attack enabled mission continuation. Theoretical protection became practical advantage. May 9, 1945 returns. Victorious absorbs kamikaze strike. Armor holds. Fires out. Debris cleared. 2.5 hours later, aircraft launching. American officers watching cannot believe British carrier continues operating. Wooden deck carriers would burn for days. Armored deck carrier resumes combat in hours. Design philosophy critics dismissed as wasteful proves combat essential. Protection enables persistence. Persistence enables victory. British naval architecture under resource constraints produced balanced solution. Could not build 90 carriers like America. Built 5 carriers that survived what killed American carriers. Armored flight deck added weight, reduced aircraft capacity, increased cost. Also enabled absorption of kamikaze strikes without elimination from combat. Trade accepted, protection over numbers. Kamikaze era validated trade completely. The critics were wrong. The armor worked. The ships survived. The missions continued. Royal Navy excellence through protective design enabling sustained operations under suicide attack. British Pacific Fleet carriers took hits that would sink others, kept fighting, proved British naval architecture philosophy correct. Sometimes best defense is not dying when hit. Armor provided that advantage. British carriers demonstrated value conclusively. Pacific Operations, 1945. British vindication through survival under fire. If you found this valuable, support us with the thanks button below. Thank you for watching.